Painting a car is about 2% actual painting and about 98% stuff that I hate doing. It's a lot of attention to detail, lots of repetitive work. It's very zen, and I am so not zen that I once built a robot to do my zen for me. I don't really want to know how to paint a car, but I do want my car painted, and I'm not going to pay somebody else to do it, so I'm just going to kind of wing it and hope for the best. Spraying paint is the last step on a long list of tasks required to paint a car, a list that includes 17 steps, 15 of which are sanding. That's actually not true. There's another sanding step added after you spray the paint. All the prep work is tedious and time-consuming. You can paint a car without all the prep work. Somebody painted my Jag a long time ago without any prep work, and it shows. I'm not looking for a show car finish here, but I do want a nice smooth paint job for aerodynamic reasons. At least the first third of the car where the airflow is relatively nice and attached. The back 2/3 of the car don't have to look good at all because I'm going to fill that with about 4,000 stickers that you all sent in. But it does need to be painted to seal the surface and to give something smooth for the stickers to stick to. By the way, it is not too late to send in stickers. I do have a little bit of space left on the outside of the car, so if you have a sticker you want on there, send it in ASAP to the address in the description. I cannot guarantee it will be on the outside, but I will put it somewhere on the car. For now, the first step is bodywork. And for me, the first step of bodywork is modifying the frame attachment points to line up all the body panels. We did this by measuring the offset between two adjacent panels and then just bent the tabs with a screwdriver to get it flush. This worked better on some tabs than it did on others. I did Sharpie the amount we need to move the tabs on the upper body part, and paint people will tell you to never Sharpie on a car that will be painted. Apparently, if you don't sand it completely off, it will bleed through the paint. I don't care. The next step is to turn your garage into a shitty paint booth. This is actually not the next step. We totally jumped the gun on this. I thought I'd need this for sanding dust, but I mostly did wet sanding, so it wasn't an issue, and I could have saved this for near the end, which would have been nice since it was a pain to get to the toolbox like this. We left a gap for my window with a fan blowing out, so paint overspray will coat the side of my smart car that I have parked next to my garage window and am too lazy to move. We tested out the airflow in through the door, and it was great. I'm guessing you're supposed to put filters on the inlet or outlet of your paint booth, or possibly both, but we didn't, so I hope that's okay. If you've been watching this channel, you know I made this body with fiberglass using moldless construction. Moldless construction is a lot easier than using a mold, but it does come with the drawback of having an imperfect outer surface that needs a lot of finishing. Basically, you can use a mold and have all the paint on the front side, or you can use moldless and have all the paint on the back side, and I chose the paint on the back side. There's a bunch of little pits and seams and places where the weave of the fiberglass shows through. To fill this all in, we're going to use fairing compound. This is a thick 2-part epoxy compound that's kind of like Bondo, but made specifically for fiberglass. I use this stuff from Total Boat that works pretty well. You mix it together in equal parts and smear it on the body to fill in all the holes and cracks. Then you sand it down to make it flush with the outside. There are a couple of things you have to keep an eye on here. One is that if you add too much fairing compound, you're just going to make your job harder since you have to sand off everything that isn't needed. The other is that you have to be careful not to sand through the resin of your fiberglass. If you do that, you have exposed glass fibers, which is not good. You'll have to reapply some compound or epoxy over that to seal it up and then start all over again. I did a lot of this already after I finished making the fiberglass parts. This time was more small details and a few larger areas like the nose of the car and the transition between the nose and the canopy. After this, I sanded the entire car, even the stuff I didn't fill over, because I need a good scuffed up surface for the primer to stick to. But before primer, I had to go back and do some more fairing compound over some spots that I had missed the last time. Also, we kind of accidentally bonded the canopy closed, so we had to cut that gap to be able to open it. I said the back part of the car was going to be all stickers, so nobody's going to see that paint, but there is another part of the car that will rarely, if ever, be seen, and that is the floor. Unfortunately, my engine hoist is at a friend's house, so to get the floor out from under the car, we used my rusty high-lift jack. And if you've ever used a high-lift jack before, you know that it is incredibly sketchy and you might die at any moment. Especially mine, which is so rusted, you need to help it along with a hammer. And with that, we are ready for primer. Just kidding, we still have 4 more hours of sanding to do before we can lay down the primer. Did I mention there's a lot of sanding? After that, we are actually ready for primer, as soon as we figure out how to get the lid off the primer. You can do epoxy primer, then urethane primer, which might be a good idea if you're painting metal. The epoxy primer has good corrosion resistance and adhesion to metal. Urethane primer is good for filling in small imperfections and it's easier to sand. I'm not painting metal, I'm painting fiberglass, so I'm just going to go with urethane primer. Since I live in California, I can't get that really good primer that causes cancer and endangered turtles. I have to get low VOC primer or roll-on primer. Typically, you'd spray primer on a car, but Eastwood assures me that roll-on primers have come a long way in the last few years. And there are a lot of pictures and videos of people using roll-on primer successfully, so I decided to give it a shot. And we had problems with the roll-on primer from the get-go. The rollers that come with the kit will disintegrate pretty quickly, leaving parts of the edges stuck to the car. On top of that, it was difficult to keep from having little lines at the edge of the roller. Part of this was maybe because we did the first parts in direct sunlight, which the instructions might tell you not to do. I don't know, I didn't read them. When we did the full car later, we managed to mostly avoid the lines by just being careful about rolling the paint on. This was helped by the fact that the car is mostly one big convex curve. The primer looks thin but rolls on pretty thick, and the rollers leave a texture on the primer. It's consistent, but you do have to sand it down, and it takes a lot because the texture is deep. Deeper than the primer in some places, so even with 3 coats, you sand for a while to get rid of the texture, and by that point, you've gone through the primer on several spots. This, of course, would not be a problem if I did like 9 coats of primer, but I don't want that much primer on my car. I could fill in the texture with some finishing glaze, but then I'd have to go back and primer over that, thus creating the problem again. I hate painting. This coat of primer did help me notice some areas that still needed some filler. I was expecting this. It's hard to see the imperfections when your car looks like it crashed into a paint shop. Once it was all the same color, the imperfections stood out, so I sanded the whole thing again to get rid of most of the texture and went back with some more filler to fill the rest of the texture and all the imperfections that were left. For this, I couldn't use that fairing compound since it's not made to work over primer. Instead, I used some finishing glaze. This is a lot like Bondo, except that it spreads on thinner. I like this stuff, except that its working life is about 5 minutes, and you spend at least one of those mixing it, so you have to mix it in a small batch and smear it on quickly a little bit at a time. Then, after you've used less than half of your small batch, the rest is rock hard, and you have to start again. So I mixed about 30 batches of this stuff using cut-up cardboard boxes and a ton of these Bondo spreader things. This highlights another annoying thing about painting. You always end up going through so many consumables. They're not expensive unless you're buying lots of them, which you are. But the annoying part is going back and forth to the store. Eventually, I remembered that I have the bamboo, so I just started 3D printing things. This was especially nice with the spreader since I went through a ton of these getting this all mixed. It also came in very handy with a pour spout for the primer so I don't make a mess, and the drill mixing sticks, which I've used in the past. I'll link all these files in the description. Anyway, I slathered the finishing glaze onto all the imperfections, and on a couple of parts I just smeared it over the whole thing. And then, you're not going to believe this, sanding. Sanding the whole thing again. Here's the thing, I can't paint this like this. The finishing glaze is not primer. I have to primer over that before I can paint. Also, I sanded through the primer in some places, and I'm definitely not using that roll-on primer again. So I drove to my local automotive paint shop, bought a gallon of urethane spray-on primer, went to Harbor Freight and bought the cheapest paint gun they sell and sprayed on the primer. There are several knobs on this paint gun for various things, and the instructions probably say what they do, but here's what I did. I just filled it with primer and started spraying, and it was all good. So I didn't even need to read the instructions. I did read the instructions on the primer can, mostly because they were easy to read. By the way, this is the way all instructions should be. No more of this crap. The primer went on super easily, much less texture than the roll-on stuff, and I had zero problem spraying it on. Surely the paint will be just as easy. Our crappy paint booth worked excellent at keeping overspray off of all the stuff in my garage, and there was a lot of overspray. Definitely put up plastic if you're going to be doing this. This Harbor Freight sprayer worked great. Definitely worth the money if you're only going to use it once, and the best part is the cleanup is a breeze. And then you're ready for paint. Right after just a little more sanding. And some spot filler, and sand that, and then spray some primer over that, and then some more sanding. This is part 1 in a 7-part series on how to paint a car, the first 6 parts of which are sanding. Just kidding, we are actually ready for paint. If you want a really good professional paint job, you're going to need a separate base color and clear coat, but if you want a good enough paint job, you can just use single stage paint. Single stage paints combine the clear and base into one paint. They don't protect as well as a 2-stage paint, and it's harder to get a really nice paint job with them, but it's way easier, so we're going to do that. Since the primer went on without any issues, I had a lot of confidence going into the paint step. So of course I didn't bother to look into how to set up the gun or do any of this, I just started spraying. I first did the underside parts, so it doesn't really matter if I mess this up since nobody will ever see it, unless I crash. These parts got a lot of orange peel. I did 3 coats, and then I sort of realized halfway through that orange peel is additive. If you spray 1 coat with orange peel and then a second orange peel coat, you get double the orange peel. I figured this was because I wasn't putting the paint on wet enough, so on the tail I laid it on thicker, and that did not work. I should probably look into how to actually paint. I think there were two things I did wrong here. One is that I didn't have the paint gun perpendicular to the surface. The paint comes out in a vertical line that is sort of even, but when you tilt the gun at an angle to the surface, you get a lot more paint where it's closer. So this gets too much paint and this not enough, and then you get runs. I also didn't realize that the gun doesn't spray paint for the first half of the trigger travel. So if you let the trigger halfway out at the end of a paint stroke, the paint stops, but the air keeps flowing. So the edge of the paint is less abrupt. By the way, I know this is not the best instructional video for how to paint your car. I didn't read half the instructions and didn't bother to learn the basic techniques, and yet somehow this is still better than an average YouTube video on how to paint your car. There are so many bad videos about this. A lot of them don't even tell you anything. They just talk about how it's an art. I don't know what bothers me more, all the people calling it an art or the fact that it is kind of an art. I was very careful painting the nose of the car, and that did come out pretty good. Most of the rest of the car too, with a couple notable spots where I had tons of runs. I'm not sure what happened here. I think maybe my overlap was too much. Possibly I was just too close. I'm pretty sure I could get a better paint job with rattle cans just because I have so much more experience with it. To fix all these drips, I got a razor blade and cut off all the bumps and then went back and sanded it down with some 220 grit sandpaper and resprayed over it. I don't know if this is the correct way to do this, and I don't care. I also shot the front end of the car with another coat just to make sure it had enough coverage. And I gotta say, this is a really nice paint job on this other YouTube car. My paint job, not nearly as good. Overall though, not bad. I'll need to sand down a couple of small drips here in the front and this big one on the nose. The parts of the car where I did all the sanding and prep work came out pretty nice, and the parts of the car where I half-assed it came out looking, well, half-assed. But that's fine, because I will cover it with stickers and nobody will ever know about this. To get my paint job as nice as that other car, the next step in this process is more sanding, block sanding with some 1500 grit sandpaper to get all the texture down, then some 2000 grit, and some polishing compound to make it all nice and flat and shiny. Or at least those would be the next steps if this were not a race car, but since it is a race car, the next step is to crack open a beer and enjoy being done with painting. Right after I clean up this enormous mess. After I finished the paint and pretty much finished this video, I decided to actually try and correct the paint by sanding down the orange peel and polishing it. I bought the nicest equipment my local Harbor Freight had in stock. I started by sanding the whole car with some 800 grit sandpaper, followed by 1200. I, of course, did not bother to put on a bunny suit or even change clothes, so I got a nice pattern on my pants, shirt, and face. Then I used some heavy cut compound, followed by some fine cut to polish it out. I half-assed this on the back half of the car, but tried a little harder to get all the orange peel out on the nose before I blew through the paint in several spots. So I'll have to figure out how to repaint and blend that in. But I think the lesson here is to never try harder than you need to, because it always leads to more sanding. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but I do not enjoy sanding. Used to be that you had to impress people to get people to watch your show, but now all you have to do is impress the algorithm. So do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. It actually helps the channel a lot. And of course, all hail the algorithm.